Hey guys, Jamie here from the Flow Genome Project on our second ever Facebook Live, and today we are going to talk about something that came up a lot in the comments from our first one on Friday, which was fundamentally what is this notion of moving our ego or sense of ourselves from our operating system or the whole enchilada, kind of fundamentally like I am me, and that's as far as it extends, and instead kind of upgrading that and moving us from ego as operating system to ego as user interface. And since there were so many comments and so much kind of inquiry, like, wow, neat idea, I'd like to learn more, thought we'd take a little bit of time today and just kind of go into that. So the first thing to note is this is going to be a tightly bound 30 minutes. I have a hard stop at 1:30 Central Time, so we're just going to jump right in, and as folks join in and people start posting comments, etc., we can kind of open up the conversation. But for those of you that are here already, as well as folks that are watching after the fact, I want to kind of take it from the top. So a little bit of backstory, a little bit of sort of almost psycho-history or cultural history, which was kind of like my geeked out specialty in graduate school. I'm going to just change my mic a moment and just see if we can get any kind of better sound. Is that any better? Let us know in the notes if so. And let me also just, okay. Let's see if those two things help. So we're going to start with a little bit of kind of cultural history, which is where did our egos come from in the first place? Because for most of us, we would just assume the way we've grown up and the way we perceive our lives, our stories, our choices, even kind of our inner monologues and self-narratives, that's just been the way humans have always been. But in reality, it's highly, highly likely, and there's a lot of kind of cultural evidence to suggest that this invention of a separate, rational individual self is actually surprisingly recent as far as psychological technology. So if you think back to even the Middle Ages and certainly sort of Roman era, pre-Roman era, sort of early agriculture, etc., which is really, again, just a blip in the whole span of human evolution, people did not think of themselves the way we just reflexively do these days, in the sense of, I'm little Johnny, I can grow up to be president or astronaut, I can move 7 places, I can hold 10 jobs, I can do all these different things, sky's the limit, and I am, as Rousseau once said, the tabula rasa, that blank slate upon which I write the grand narrative of my life. Right? In America in particular, there's a sort of notion of the Protestant work ethic. Back at the end of the 19th century, there was Horatio Alger, which was the origins of fundamentally sort of Tony Robbins can-doism. Before Napoleon Hill, before all those folks, there was the story of Horatio Alger. You can pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and make your mark on the world. Well, that sounds so familiar as to almost be old-fashioned, but actually it's not. It's one of the more startlingly modern and recent psychotechnologies we've ever had. Literally, psychotechnology, just a mind, basically a bit of mind software, a way we think about thinking. In reality, that didn't really kick in until the French Enlightenment fully. And while you had some smart, switched-on folks in the ancients, Plato, Cicero, Socrates, Aristotle, all those folks, in general, most people were locked into place. I very, rarely ventured more than 50 miles from where I was born, as well as caste. In the sense of I was born a miller, a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, and so was my father and my father before him, or my mother, and so on, all the way down the line. And I just fundamentally repeat what was done before me with very little variation, and therefore very little agency or self-control, and therefore also quite a lot less self-reflection and hand-wringing, because that's one of the things that happens. So in the French Enlightenment, you have Descartes, famously saying, I think, therefore I am, meaning that cognition, what's going on behind my eyes, is the seat of being and reason. It then introduced all kinds of phenomenal breakthroughs. It's the underpinning of the scientific revolution. It's the underpinning of the French Revolution, right? Liberté, égalité, fraternité, so liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Of course, that didn't turn out so well for the frogs, but there you go. They haven't done so well in that sort of whole warfare thing. But nonetheless, profound ideals going on to inspire the American Revolution, and its follow-ons, right? So what we had there are all sorts of wonderful ideas that generated tons of social, civic, and historical benefits, but came with a catch. And the catch was there wasn't a way to turn off that self-awareness. So fast forward from Rousseau and Descartes and those guys all the way to, sort of 20th century Woody Allen and 21st century Jason Silver, and you have people going, I think so much that I no longer know who I am. And that has then become sort of the neurosis of the postmodern era. Starting after World War II with, holy shit, we can destroy ourselves with these atom bombs. You have Camus and Sartre and the French existentialists. What's the point? and we have been just kind of cut adrift in this era where there is no capital T truth, there is no solid meaning, everything is contextual and relative, and I am just now adrift in a sea of infinite perspectives. And one of the predictable results of that is a hell of a lot of anxiety, a hell of a lot of uncertainty, and generally mental suffering. And so what we have is, you've got 1 in 4 Americans today are on psychoactive pharmaceuticals. So crazy, 1 in 4 of us, right? Suicide rates are rising for everyone from teenagers all the way through people in their high 70s. And we die more often from painkiller prescription overdoses, right, than we do from car accidents. So you could make a fairly solid case that we have overclocked our processors, that this very cool tool of the rational individual that was built and sort of evolved and developed and created all kinds of amazing changes, literally civil rights, democratic free market societies, all these kinds of things came as a result of us thinking I am a separate free agent in the world and I can make my mark as I want. But there wasn't an off switch for it. And so it's turned into something that eats us alive. We can't ever, that's the people who lie awake at night staring at the ceiling. That's us who can't get out of our own heads, who are always rehashing and rehearsing stories. And it is literally running us into the ground. So the question is what to do about that? And the good news is that we no longer actually have to remain exclusively identified with our psychological stories or narratives. And so then what we can do instead is retrain our egos. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but there's a kind of a sense, particularly in Eastern traditions, sort of a lot of New Age or spiritual traditions, that you want to transcend or go beyond or kill or silence the ego. And we would propose that creates as many problems as it solves. And if anybody remembers Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby, right, that old Uncle Remus story in the Disney or the actual original Uncle Remus, where Brer Rabbit is the kind of quintessential trickster, and Brer Bear and Brer Fox, who are always getting tricked by him. In fact, Bugs Bunny is basically an evolution of Brer Rabbit, as far as that trickster archetype. But back to the day, Brer Rabbit, they finally figure out a way to catch him, and they build this little baby made of tar, and they put a cap and a corncob pipe on him, and they put him by the road where they know Brer Rabbit's going to go, and Brer Rabbit goes by, and he tips his hat, and he says, howdy, and the Tar Baby doesn't say anything. He's an inanimate lump of tar. And then Brer Rabbit gets pissed off, and he says, I said howdy. If you don't say howdy back, I'm going to blip you one, right? So sure enough, Brer Rabbit takes a swing, gets stuck. He gets more and more mad, gets double stuck. Then he tries to kick him, and the next thing you know, the more swings that Brer Rabbit has taken at the Tar Baby, the stucker he gets, right? And in a lot of ways, trying to get rid of our egos, whether through meditation, whether through serenity, whether through excess and partying, through whatever it is, can often leave us more stuck to the very thing we're trying to get rid of than before. And so that is why classically, and I will always lovingly make this joke, but it's why Western Buddhists tend to be an uptight bunch, because they're trying so goddamn hard to not thinking about their thinking, right, that they get thoroughly wrapped around their own axle. So the question is if you don't want to play that game, and the only rule of playing with the Tar Baby is just don't take that first swing, right? Don't take that first swing. So what can we do instead? And if anybody has been lucky enough, fortunate enough, skillful enough to experience peak states, even occasionally, then you may have noticed that when you're in those states, one of the hallmarks is a sense of selflessness, a sense of like, oh, for a moment, I'm not thinking about my thinking, even if it's only as long as I'm not thinking about my thinking and then realizing, oh, I'm not thinking about my thinking. Damn it, I'm thinking about my thinking again, just in that very moment, right? Just in the noticing of the fact that I have no more sensations and I get kicked out and I'm like, oh, son of a bitch, it was so perfect for 30 seconds. So the question can be, how do we leverage the use of peak states where we experience selflessness, right? Where that inner voice goes quiet, and actually use it as basically step one on a stepping stone that can take us all the way to the other side of this river and into a fundamentally new way of relating to ourselves and the world. And what we would propose is that instead of trying to defeat it, kill it, transcend the Tar Baby of the ego, the self, the conscious waking self, you just retrain it. and you actually make friends with it. You're like, okay, hey, you neurotic basket of nerves, and you endless incessant chatter. It's just like a puppy that pees on the rug and eats your slippers. Just retrain it. You don't need to banish it. So what does a retrained ego look like, and what does it do? How do you keep it busy? Well, the simplest thing to say is, okay, I am not my thoughts. I am not my psychology. I am not the wallpaper of my mind. And in fact, thanks to the last couple of decades of research, we realized, wow, there's 1,001 different ways to change my inner subjective experience beforehand, before having my inner subjective experience, whether that's embodied cognition, standing up, sitting tall, power postures, whether that's breathing, whether that's diet, movement, exercise, whether that's any form of sort of more advanced technologies like mindfulness, meditation, all those kinds of things. Any and all of them, and the more the merrier in combination, can radically shift how I'm feeling about my inner state. And to give you guys an example, last week we had just been pushing super hard to finish and submit the manuscript for our book, so we had been burning through all kinds of normal barriers or kind of places, hey, time to stop and rest, recharge, etc. We hadn't been doing that. We've been deliberately burning the midnight oil and knowing we were just gunning for a finish line. So the next couple of days, I found myself checking in with a degree of exhaustion, fatigue, all the corners I'd cut for the prior month were kind of coming home to roost, right? And I could have been really gloomy, mopey, depressed. I could have been irritable, angry, a whole bunch of things. And I certainly noticed a lot of those options, right, showing up in my encounters with family, friends, etc., even inner self-talk. And instead I was like, okay, I'm significantly out of whack from my normal best practices, and so I'm just going to start moving my body. I'm going to go for some mountain bike rides. I'm going to get out and do some stand-up paddling. And I'm going to really focus on clean eating, and I'm not going to commit to any of those particular stories or choice points. And trust that over 3, 4, 5 days, I'm going to be giving my body, brain, and therefore mind more of what's good for it, and then shift my state in that way. And arguably, compared to going on a 2 or 3 day jag, blowing up certain relationships, expressing energy in less than conscious ways, right? I just was like, okay, I'm not going to buy into any of those things, and I'm just going to double down on the stuff I know makes it all better. And that can be a profound and powerful thing. So back to that's the premise. How do we repurpose our ego and retrain it from our operating system, the whole enchilada, to our user interface? Awesome. What does that dashboard or user interface look like? And fundamentally, you can say anything. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. You can get into neuroanatomy, what parts of my brain are turning on and off, and general rule of thumb is, the more advanced prefrontal stuff is really good for waking state problem solving, not so good for ruminating or endlessly thinking about stuff. So if I can get out of that part of my head where my self-consciousness is, awesome. If I can focus on coherent heart rates and breathing, even more awesome. If I can control my respiration, controlling my respiration doesn't just affect oxygen saturation, although that's a fundamental baseline, right, for fight or flight or happiness and contentment, but it also triggers a host of other neurophysiological responses. And then movement, posture, right, exposure, practicing gratitude, all these things are ways to shift how we think without having to engage the narratives of thinking. And Chengetai, if I'm pronouncing that right, said, I am not the wallpaper of my mind. Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know whether you picked up that phrase from Jason Silva, who, funnily enough, just quoted me, and I just saw one of his videos where I had said to him on a phone call once, I was like, music is the wallpaper of our minds, which is why I'm always such a huge fan of having tunes on. And by the way, there's a sidebar, but an interesting one. Apple and Sonos just did an extended study where they put sensors like with Nest sensors and Apple iTunes and phones along with Sonos speakers in people's houses, and found that people who had music on more than 4.5 hours a day were like 17% more likely to cook. They were 22% more likely to be within 3 feet of each other, so they were literally closer. They were 37% more likely to make love. There were all these kind of interesting things that also happened with music. But yes, music as a wallpaper of my mind, as a way to shift my state and to fill my brain and mind with other interesting things and rhythms and beats, is a phenomenally effective way of just having fun with this notion of what does my user interface look like. You don't have to get super technical with it. You can just go out and live, because we, neat humans that we are, have been making art, making culture, making all of these kind of components accessible for us all along. We have one here, Lucas asking, what types of movement practices do you integrate into your life? We can start with this, but certainly this is wide open for the best movement practices are the ones you are most prone to do on a regular basis, hands down. So far better to move in any way, even if it's jumping jacks in your closet, than to not move at all. That said, I'm a huge fan of being upside down. I very rarely find myself in my most stressed out states when I'm spending lots of time upside down. Even a headstand or a handstand against a wall or a door, totally fine. And I also very rarely find myself still regularly getting upside down when I'm most stressed. So is there a direct correlation? Probably not. But the ability to be literally flexible and adaptive in our physical postures are phenomenal. So I would say move your body in as full and interesting ranges of motion as possible, as often as possible. If doing something like yoga and sun salutations is your bag, fantastic. If there's any cultural or mental blocks around something that seems sort of esoteric or out there, you can just do some really straightforward push-ups, squats, lunges, the things to unkink our desk-bound selves. All of those are fantastic. And all of those have a disproportionate impact on our mood and well-being. So the point is if I'm feeling blue and gloomy, I could then lurch around in my mind for the person or the thing to blame, and I can engage a victim drama story. And then I need something to rescue me, whether it's another person to hear my story, or whether it's booze or alcohol or online shopping or whatever it's going to be. I look for a rescuer, and then I've got this tidy little drama triangle going around, right? Or you can just say, screw all that. I'm going to raise the stage of my physiological self, just so I have more vitality. And when I have more vitality, I just won't be thinking all of those thoughts. So it's just and it's not to say that the body is the be-all and end-all. It's just to say these days we have massively over-optimized the headspace. You know, there's self-help books, there's all this stuff. I mean, a dime and a dozen advice everywhere. We've hyper-optimized that to the point of saturation and confusion. And then our disembodied physical selves are just massive areas. There's nothing but headroom there as far as easy wins, low-hanging fruit, all of those components. So hopefully that helps. The idea of moving from operating system to user interface. So take my ego from the whole show over to just the thing that helps manage and monitor. Do I have enough rest? Do I have enough hydration? Do I have enough movement? Do I have enough gratitude? Do I have enough sunlight? Do I have enough exposure to a host of helpful things? And what is the simplest, most rational way for me to increase those without engaging my stories? Now, the interesting things, so Eric just asked, any thoughts on body care practices like rolfing? Hell yes. So fundamentally, you can basically take a look at mind, body, spirit, or actually probably body, mind, spirit, across time, space, and gravity. And that gives you a 3x3 matrix. And in that 3x3 matrix, you can basically hack your consciousness and your life. And one of the simplest things is that very few of us are physically in the present moment, right? Most of us have this accumulation of kinks, imbalances, unhealed trauma, a whole host of things that are in our nervous system and our muscle tissue. And we are not actually just balanced, integrated, alive, and aware right now. So something like rolfing, and for anybody that isn't familiar with that came from Ida Rolf. She came from the German gymnasium movement in the 30s, fled 30s era Germany, came to the United States, spent a lot of time at Esalen and other kind of those early hotbeds of the human potential movement, and she was really into like myofascial release and integration. So literally, if anybody's ever eaten fried chicken and found those little wibbly wobbly bits on the end of a drumstick that kind of creep you out, that's some of the tendons and myofascia, right? That is those sliding surfaces, it's the spaces in between muscles, bones, ligaments, and tendons, and massively helpful in tuning up bodies, creating accurate and aligned posture, all of those kind of things. Moshe Feldenkrais was another who came out of Israel. He was a badass Israeli commando, judoka, martial artist, all these kind of things. He innovated some super sophisticated methods of physical movement. The Alexander technique, there's tons of them out there, and just fundamentally, the more the merrier, up to the point of confusion and not beyond, right? So check it out. We are only as intelligent and conscious as our movement patterns, and really consider adding those into your mix. Now, what happens if, what do I do with all that extra headspace if I'm not actively living in my stories all the time? I mean, that's the first question would be like, okay, that's fine, but then what, right? Well, the then what is you basically flip the script. You guys have probably all heard of the Pareto Principle, like the idea that, that 20% of the things in your life give you 80% of the value, or 20% of the clothes in your closet you wear 80% of the time. All of those kind of things. 80-20 rule, right, is how it's often known. And the idea that we, just a rule of thumb to think about is to say, hey, I'm maybe, for the sake of arguments, I spend 80% of my time in my psychology, behind my eyes, up in my head, spinning out stories. And I only spend 20% of my time thinking about rest, sleep, hydration, balance, you name it, everything else in my life. And you can flip that. And you can just say, I'm going to actually start dwindling down the amount of time I spend in my narratives, in my ego, to about 20%. And I'm going to spend 80% tending the garden of myself, right? My body, my alignment, right? Any inspiration or whatever, what you would call or could call spirit or purpose or meaning, right? I'm going to notice when I kick into a certain story, like someone is going to be really nice to me, and that might positively put me in my story, like, oh wow, that feels so good to feel acknowledged, or something else. But then there could be, for most of us, it's the nut shots and the gut shots, right, that get us. We're like, oh, that bastard with the road rage, how dare he? Where did he get off? Or a boss, or a spouse, or a friend does something that hijacks us, right? And that's going to keep happening. That's going to keep happening. It's just time. So you can start training the muscle to get hijacked by my stories less often and less deeply. And then I can just return to center. It's like someone learning to surf for the first time, right? When you first stand up on a surfboard, the slightest pitch sends you back into the drink. And then as you get better and better, you're able to see, anticipate, and feel, and stay carving on the board, and even start doing more and more ambitious things. So fundamentally, as we start moving, flipping the script from 80% psych to 20% psych, and from 20% embodied cognition, or the rest of our body, brains, and minds, to 80% of that, there are moments of sort of spaciousness, like, wow, this is awesome. I'm actually not thinking for extended periods. And then there are moments of sort of even just panic, or we find ourselves sabotaging our own selflessness. We find ourselves going back to drama stories, basically being the kind of firefighter and arsonist of our own lives. We literally go back and just stir shit up because we're used to it. Like, there's this really kind of perversely satisfying drama I have with my mom, so I'll give her a call and I'll end up slamming down the phone and feeling righteous again, or something with a neighbor, or something, wherever in our life. So there has to be also some discipline of saying, okay, if I'm going to back away from my stories, and if I'm going to spend a significant and informed chunk of my time tuning my neurophysiology, and again, nothing more fancy than move more, breathe more, eat well, right? Be grateful, make love, sleep, right? Really simple shit has outsized impacts. Like, that's just how goofily disembodied we've become. Is shit. Okay, there we go. So it's still telling me my connection is weak, but I am here in the Chase downtown office building in good old Austin, Texas, and these guys can't even keep their Wi-Fi up. So there you have it. I'm probably better off on 3G. So the point is what do we do with all the extra bandwidth? What do we do with all that extra bandwidth when I'm not just doubling down on my psychological storytelling? And the first thing that happens is you find yourself spending more time in what we would call, or what you could call, a flow state, except that rather than that being an occasional thing, a glimpse for seconds or minutes, it becomes a more enduring or abiding thing. And then there's this subtle watershed, right? It's almost like a continental divide where, the rain falls in the Rocky Mountains, and some of it goes to the Gulf of Mexico, and some of it goes to the Pacific Ocean. Well, there's a subtle continental divide in our own consciousness and our own experience of these things. And it goes from, there's a state I occasionally reach of where my mind goes quiet, I'm immersed in the present moment, everything feels easy and fun, to that's actually a place I'm in more often than not, and there's states where I occasionally get knocked out of it by the old dramas, by the old stories. And you may not notice it, you probably won't be able to put it on the calendar if and when it happens for you, but the other side of it is a fundamentally different reality. Because then you're basically just steering back to it. You're saying, okay, I now trust this experience, I trust how to get back here, it's in my muscle memory. It's no longer something I fantasize about or project on or mythologize. It's just, hey, I've taken responsibility for getting myself to and from those states of awareness. No tar baby, no drama, no cults and gurus, right? No magical thinking needed. I just conduct this experiment and I get good enough at it that I become baseline competent, right? And so that's the game to play. Now, that sounds like an awesome free lunch, and it is kind of. Except here's the final thing that I want to share with you guys today, which is when you experience those moments of stepping outside ourselves, what we in our book Stealing Fire, and certainly in a lot of our teachings, call ecstasis, which is just the original Greek to step outside oneself. Right? When you have those moments, yes, they show you quite often amazing insights, inspiration, information. Like, holy shit, either a sense of familiarity, like I can't believe I'm back here again, I remember all this stuff, or utter novelty and amazement, wow, this is the coolest thing ever. But either way, we experience ecstasis. But the other half of the equation, and this is the son of a bitch, is that level of clarity and that level of insight and that level of connecting the dots gives us a significant kick in the ass of what are we pretending not to know about ourselves, about where we cut corners, about where we're not in integrity, about where we're out of whack in relationships or livelihood or any of these things. That stuff almost always comes rolling in too. It's like X-ray vision, and it shows you everything, not just what looks pretty in the nice looking sunset over the mountains. So ecstasis is almost always hot on the heels or combined with catharsis, which is that whole notion, Aristotelian notion of break down to break through. So ecstasis plus catharsis, right, mending where we're busted up and broken, equals gnosis. And gnosis, G-N-O-S-I-S, is that Greek notion of sort of like direct experience of the way things are. So ecstasis, the peak experience; catharsis, the breakdown that comes from being shown where we're fallible and mortal, equal, and when you repeat those two, like pop up above the clouds, see everything, come back, mend what's broken, that back and forth trip can result in gnosis, which is fundamentally, I am in my place, I know who I am, I know what I'm for, and I am going to go and live that life to the fullest. So with that, I want to thank you guys, and Nazanin, thanks for the heads up on the analogy. Chris, great to see your comments. And yeah, we have absolutely, not by any intent of our own, but we have arguably veered from fully embodied body, brain, mind training and programming, and instead we've kind of have been left in the cul-de-sac of psychological angst. And so the final thing I would just say is that this method of retraining our egos, not getting stuck in the tar baby, translating them from operating system or the whole enchilada to user interface, just the thing that we use to go and do as much good stuff for the rest of ourselves as possible, that sort of leaves you off the hook. You don't actually have to wonder if there's meaning and purpose in life, because you can actually create the neurophysiological conditions by which you are far more likely to experience it. You don't have to go hunting. You don't have to go wondering. Now, you're off the hook on that front. You don't have to do the hand-wringing Woody Allen number. But you're sort of on the cross. You're sort of like, you're nailed up right there at the intersection of kairos and chronos, of sacred time and mundane time. So kairos in the Greek term is the vertical axis. Chronos, mundane clock time, is the horizontal axis. And right there is a human being who is aware of everything that's going on and is still connected here in this world. And that, honestly, is an excruciating son of a bitch. But, right, it's take your pick. You got to just choose where we take our licks. And it's fundamentally either neurotic Woody Allen, hand-wringing existential angst, or, boom, today's a good day to die. I know what I'm here for. I know where I'm broken. I know where I'm invulnerable. And I'm going to move forward with both of those things without apology. So guys, thank you so much. And Sarit, hello from Israel, back at you. Hello from Austin, Texas. Thanks guys very much for coming out, and look forward to the next one. We're going to be doing 2 to 3 of these every week. And if they're interested to you, share them, make likes in the comments and all those kind of good things. And we will see more of you guys as we roll out the next ones. Cheers, everybody.